When the bride pointed me toward the trash bins, I finally understood my place in their perfect little love story. I'm Evan, 32, and if you'd asked me last year how I felt about my younger brother getting married, I'd have said I was happy for him. Genuinely. Jeremy and I weren't close, never had been, but we coexisted peacefully. We were those siblings who shared a roof growing up, but not much else. He was loud, brash, constantly surrounded by friends or drama. I was quiet, a bit reserved, always more comfortable listening than talking. Still, I always showed up for him when it mattered. Birthdays, college move-in, even those messy breakups where he'd call me slurring his words at 3 a.m. I'd answer. I'd come. I always came. So when the wedding invitation arrived, I RSVP'd yes without a second thought. It felt like a given. I was his only brother, after all. I should have noticed the signs. The invite said, Evan plus guest, but there was no call, no message, no, hey man, can't wait to see you there. When I texted him to ask what the dress code was, just a casual question, he replied 2 days later with a thumbs up emoji. That was it. No see you soon, no details. I chalked it up to stress. Weddings are chaos. Maybe he was overwhelmed. That's what I told myself, because the alternative, that he didn't care if I came or not, wasn't something I was ready to consider. The day of the wedding was bright and hot, the kind of late summer afternoon where everything feels loud. I drove 2 hours to the venue, a fancy vineyard I'd never heard of but immediately realized was the kind of place that cost a small fortune just to breathe on. Rows of white chairs faced a flower-drenched altar, and everything smelled like fresh roses and money. I'd brought a gift, an envelope with a generous check, more than I probably should have given, but again, it felt like a given. Jeremy was family. You show up, you support, you give. I walked up to the welcome table and smiled at the girl behind the clipboard. She scanned the list, frowned slightly, then scribbled something on a post-it before glancing up. Just you, right? I nodded, a little thrown off by her tone. Yeah, Evan. She pointed vaguely toward the far side of the seating area. We're pretty full, but there's some standing room by the hedge. She said it like she was offering me a privilege. I blinked. There's no seat for me? She shrugged. Sorry. Bride's side did some last-minute adjustments. Last-minute adjustments. Like I was luggage that didn't make it onto the plane. I stood there for a second, dumbfounded. I scanned the rows. I saw cousins. Old high school friends. A guy Jeremy used to play Call of Duty with in college. Even the hairstylist was there, fanning herself and chatting with someone who looked like the officiant. But no seat for me. I swallowed it. I told myself not to make a scene. It was his day, not mine. I started walking toward the hedge when I heard her voice, sharp, nasal, a little too theatrical. Oh, you can stand by the trash, she said, pointing behind her without looking at me. We're out of seats. It was Paige, the bride. We'd met 3 times. Once over lunch, once at a family barbecue, and once when I helped Jeremy move apartments and she barely acknowledged me. Each interaction left me with the same impression. Paige was pretty, polished, and profoundly uninterested in anyone who couldn't serve a function in her social climbing. At first, I thought she was joking, but when I laughed, her face didn't change. I mean, seriously, she added, waving a hand like she was dismissing a waiter. There's a spot near the bins. You'll be fine. I looked around. People were watching. Some awkwardly looked away. No one spoke up, not even Jeremy. I saw him a few feet away, adjusting his tie and talking to one of Paige's uncles. He glanced at me, gave a tight smile, and then went right back to his conversation. Like this was normal. Like it was okay. Like I wasn't the guy who helped him pay off a credit card bill last year when Paige's ring accidentally went on his emergency fund. And that's when something clicked. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. I looked at the gift in my hand, an envelope with a 4-digit check and a handwritten note wishing them happiness, and I realized exactly what I was to them. A wallet. A placeholder. Background noise. I turned to Paige and smiled. Fitting, I said, nodding toward the bins. Since that's where this marriage belongs. I don't remember if she said anything back. Maybe she gasped. Maybe she didn't. I just turned around, walked toward the parking lot, and felt the weight of something lift off my shoulders. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, fast, uneven. Evan, wait. Jeremy. I kept walking. And just as I reached the car door, he caught up. Seriously? You're gonna make a scene, he said, out of breath and red in the face. This is my wedding, dude. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized I didn't recognize him anymore. I didn't say a word. He stood there, breathing hard, like I had just punched him in the gut. Like he was the one who'd just been shoved aside like last week's recycling. "Look," he said, glancing nervously back toward the venue. "You're being dramatic. Paige didn't mean anything by it." I raised an eyebrow. "She told me to stand by the trash, Jeremy." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Okay, yeah, that was not great. But it's her big day. She's stressed. You know how she gets when things don't go exactly right. That right there? That little line? It hit me harder than I expected. You know how she gets." Like he'd rehearsed this excuse before. Like there had been other moments, maybe smaller ones, maybe worse, and he'd brushed them off with the same sentence. He wasn't defending me. He was managing me. Like I was another potential PR disaster on his carefully curated wedding day. I opened the car door, slipped the envelope back into my pocket, and took one long breath. You didn't even notice I didn't have a seat. Jeremy's mouth opened. Closed. "I thought you'd find one." I laughed once. "Cold. Even the DJ's assistant got a seat, man. Your fiancé's lash technician got one. But not your brother." He looked away. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. "She said she wanted a small ceremony," he muttered. "But not too small for 20 of her friends I've never met?" I said. "Let's be honest, this wasn't an accident. This was calculated." He didn't deny it. And honestly, that hurt more than if he had. I shook my head and climbed into the car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't peel out. I just sat for a moment, letting the AC hum around me while I watched him standing there, still trying to decide if it was worth defending his bride or salvaging the last thread of decency left between us. Then he knocked. I rolled down the window halfway. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry, all right? Paige, she's particular. And maybe she felt like you didn't support our relationship or—" I never said a word against her. I cut in. "That's the problem," he snapped. "You're always so quiet. So distant. You act like you're better than everyone." And there it was. Not just Paige. Not just a missing chair. This had been simmering for years, bubbling beneath every polite interaction and forced smile. I narrowed my eyes. "You think this is about me being quiet? Or is it about you needing people who clap loud enough to hear over your own doubts?" Jeremy took a step back like I'd slapped him. "Well, yeah," I said, gripping the wheel. "Well." I pulled out slowly, leaving him standing in the gravel like a man who wasn't sure whether he'd lost something or dodged a bullet. And I didn't look back. Not when I passed the rows of parked cars. Not when I saw Paige standing near the vineyard's entrance, lips tight, eyes narrowed, one hand on her hip like she'd already spun the narrative in her favor. But I did hear the faint ping of my phone as I drove away. Paige texted, "Disrespectful and immature. I hope you're proud of yourself." Mom texted, "Jeremy's crying. You couldn't have just kept the peace for one day?" And Cheryl texted, "We all have to make sacrifices for love, Evan. Grow up." I muted the thread. I wasn't interested in playing damage control. Not this time. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, gift envelope in hand, wondering how many times I'd let myself be sidelined in the name of family unity. And what exactly that word, family, was supposed to mean when it only ran in one direction. I didn't want revenge. At least, not at first. But then I remembered something Jeremy probably forgot in all his wedding chaos. The condo. A one-bedroom they'd been renovating on weekends. The starter home Paige kept bragging about online. Jeremy didn't qualify for the mortgage on his own. His credit was a mess. But mine? Mine was clean. Solid. Dependable. So I'd co-signed 6 months ago. They needed me to close the deal. I never took my name off the deed. And that's when the idea began to take shape. Slow, deliberate, and cold. Because if I was just trash to them, then maybe it was time they learned what it felt like to lose something they thought they didn't need. I took one last sip of wine, opened my laptop, and pulled up the documents. And I smiled. That condo? It had a lot of value. The thing about being the quiet one in the family is that people forget you're watching. They mistake silence for passivity, like you're just floating through life without thoughts of your own. But quiet doesn't mean weak. It means I pick my battles. And this one? This was long overdue. The next morning, I took the day off work. Not because I was upset. Not anymore. That emotion had passed. What I felt now was purpose. Calm, clear, and steady. I brewed my coffee, clicked open the folder on my desktop marked property docs, and scrolled until I found what I needed, the co-ownership agreement for the condo Jeremy and Paige were remodeling. Back when Jeremy called me in a panic about losing their dream unit, when they needed just one more adult with clean credit to qualify for the mortgage, I was that guy. No hesitation. I'd been assured it was just on paper, that they'd take care of the payments, and once they refinanced in 6 months, my name would be removed. Well, it had been 7 months now, and I was still on the deed. I'd checked. Twice. To them, it was a formality. A signature from the dependable older brother. Something they could toss aside once the real adults took over. To me, it was leverage. At 11:03 a.m., I called the real estate attorney I'd worked with when I bought my own place. Nice guy. Discreet. Thorough. I explained the situation, asked what my options were, and waited. You're listed as a co-owner, Evan, he confirmed. That gives you considerable rights over the property. If you wanted to force a sale or reclaim occupancy, you could. Even if I haven't been living there? I asked. Doesn't matter, he replied. Ownership is ownership. That was all I needed. I thanked him, hung up, and started drafting a letter. Not a legal notice, yet, but something polite. Formal. The kind of letter that makes your stomach drop by paragraph 3. I titled it, Notice of Intent to Assume Full Occupancy. Then I paused, because I wanted this to land with precision. Not fury, not drama, just inevitability. I wanted Paige to read it with her morning latte and feel the same sharp flicker of humiliation I felt standing by those trash bins in a press suit with no seat and no voice. Around 3 p.m., I printed the letter, slid it into a clean envelope, and drove it to the condo. I didn't knock. They weren't home. Probably still recovering from the post-wedding festivities, tasting cakes, reviewing drone footage, pretending their seating chart hadn't turned a brother into a punchline. I slid the envelope through the mail slot. On the way back to my car, I took one last look at the condo. It really was a nice place. Mid-century exterior, plenty of light. I'd helped paint those walls, carried in that hideous couch Paige insisted on. She said it was boho chic. Jeremy didn't even know what that meant. I got in my car and drove away, feeling lighter than I had in months. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed. Jeremy texted, "What is this letter? Are you serious?" I didn't respond. A minute later, Jeremy texted, "You can't do this, man. Paige is freaking out. We just got married. This is the worst possible timing." I finally replied, "You should have thought of that before telling me to stand by the trash." Read. No reply. I imagined them in the living room, Paige waving the letter like it was radioactive, Jeremy pacing, mumbling, checking the internet for how to remove a co-owner from a deed. Probably Googling my name, wondering if I really meant it, if I'd go through with it. I smiled, because I did, and I would. The next day, the real fun began. First came the email from Paige, long, rambling, laced with faux empathy and passive aggression. "Dear Evan, we're sorry for how things played out at the wedding. Emotions were high. I'd hoped we could start fresh as a family, but your recent actions have made that difficult. I'm not sure why you feel the need to escalate things, but Jeremy and I would appreciate a conversation to clarify everyone's intentions before lawyers get involved. Let's be adults about this." Paige. I didn't respond. The following week, I filed the initial paperwork to force a sale of the condo. My lawyer sent them the notification with my signature neatly printed at the bottom. Jeremy called that night. His voice was strained. No pretense. "You're really doing this?" he asked. "Yes." He was quiet for a beat. "Do you need the money or something?" That made me laugh. "No. I need the respect I've never gotten from you or your wife. I figure this is the closest I'll get. You're punishing me for one stupid seating mistake?" "No," I said. "I'm reminding you that I'm not disposable." He tried to argue, tried to guilt, even pulled the "but we're family" card. That one always came out when consequences hit. "You made a choice, Jeremy," I said quietly. "Now I'm making mine." And with that, I hung up. I wasn't expecting what came next. 3 days later, my mom showed up. At my door. Tired eyes. Tight lips. Holding a plastic container of lasagna like it could erase a decade of favoritism and neglect. "We need to talk," she said. No hello. No apology. Just, "We need to talk." I let her in. She sat stiffly on the edge of my couch, lasagna untouched in her lap. "I heard you're trying to take the condo," she said, as if I'd stolen candy from a child. "I own the condo, Mom. Half of it." She didn't blink. "You know how much this means to Jeremy and Paige. Why are you doing this?" That word again. Doing. Like I'd flipped the world upside down, not just stopped enabling it. "Because you all taught me something," I said slowly. "That being quiet gets you nothing but a view from the trash pile. So I'm trying something new." Mom pursed her lips. She was under stress. Weddings are complicated. So is being treated like an afterthought by your own blood. She didn't argue with that. She just stood, placed the lasagna on the counter, and said, I hope this is worth it. I walked her to the door. It already is, I said, and closed it gently behind her. I returned to the table, picked up my coffee, and watched the inbox light up again. Lawyers, mortgage officers, and, somewhere in between, Jeremy trying to find a compromise. But there wouldn't be one, because I wasn't done. And what I had planned next. That was the part they'd never see coming. The final email from their lawyer came in 2 weeks later, polished, direct, and with a faint air of desperation beneath the legalese. Our clients, Mr. Jeremy Carter and Mrs. Paige Carter, request that Mr. Evan Carter reconsider the forced sale and allow a voluntary buyout of his share. They are prepared to offer a lump sum of $15,000 as compensation in exchange for relinquishing any ownership or legal claim to the property in question. $15,000. I laughed. Out loud. Not because of the number, though. Yes, it was insultingly low, but because it was the perfect final act of arrogance wrapped in fake generosity. That condo was easily worth $500,000. The down payment alone had been $70,000. And now they wanted me to walk away for the price of a used car? Nope. I typed out a quick reply, CC'd my lawyer, and kept it simple. Offer declined. See you in mediation. Because I wasn't bluffing. I hadn't been bluffing from the moment I slid that envelope through their door. And for once in my life, I didn't care if it made me look bitter or petty. The truth was, I was bitter. But not over one wedding slight. It was years of being treated like a safety net, only unrolled when they needed something, then shoved back into the closet when they didn't. This was bigger than trash bins and seating charts. This was about every time I sat in silence so someone else could speak over me. The mediation happened a month later. A sleek office downtown, neutral walls, bad coffee. They both showed up looking tired. Paige didn't meet my eyes. Jeremy gave me a tight nod, the kind you give a stranger who might have once been important. The mediator, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, started things off cordially. We're here to determine the most amicable path forward. Evan, since you initiated the action, would you like to start? I did. I passed her a copy of my proposal already prepared, already signed. I wasn't just selling my half of the condo. I was buying theirs. Silence. Paige's head snapped up. Excuse me. Jeremy leaned forward. You're offering to buy us out? I nodded. Full market value. I've had it appraised. I'll handle closing costs and all legal fees. You walk away with a clean check and no lien on your future. The mediator blinked in surprise. That's extremely generous. It was. And it wasn't about being generous. It was about being done. Jeremy leaned back, visibly thrown. Paige's eyes narrowed. This is some power play. You just want to evict us. No, I said calmly. I want to own what I already helped build. You can stay until the end of the month. 30 days. That's more grace than I got. They didn't respond. Just whispered to each other, lips tight, hands clenched. The mediator gave them time. After 10 minutes of hushed arguing and one dramatic sigh from Paige, Jeremy finally said, We accept. And just like that, it was done. For weeks later, I had the keys. They were gone. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. The place was cleaner than I expected. A few leftover decorations still hung in the hallway, framed photos of their engagement shoot, all smiles and sunlight. I boxed them up, carefully, and left them at their new address, return label and all. I stood in the empty living room for a while, just breathing. The walls still held the faint scent of fresh paint. The same paint I'd helped roll on during that first renovation weekend, when Jeremy was excited and Paige pretended not to hate getting her hands dirty. I could still hear her complaints echoing in my head. This color looks cheap. Can we afford something more modern? I smiled. And then I opened the windows. Let the air sweep through. 2 weeks after the final papers cleared, I listed the condo for sale. I didn't want it. I never wanted it. What I wanted was control, respect, closure. And I got all three. The condo sold above asking. I made back my share and then some. More than the money, though, was the peace. I didn't hear from Jeremy again. Not directly. But I saw the posts. Passive-aggressive Instagram stories about fake family, and some people never grow up. Paige went on a podcast ranting about how jealous siblings ruin marriages. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I just watched, sipped my coffee, and smiled. My mom texted once. Just one line. I hope you're proud of what you did. I didn't reply. But if I had, I would have said, I am. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't just show up. I didn't just take it. I chose me. A few months later, I moved into a new place, my own, paid for in full with the profit from the sale. No shared deeds. No cosigns. No Paige. No Jeremy. Just sunlight, quiet, and space that was entirely mine. I put up one framed photo in the living room. Not of family. Not of weddings. Just a landscape shot I took on a solo trip the week after everything ended, a mountain road in the distance, empty and open, winding towards something better. Every time I pass it, I remember that moment by the trash bins. And I smile. Because that was the day I stopped standing in the background and started building something for myself. My name's Nathan, I'm 27, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had a habit of brushing off anything I went through as if it were either an exaggeration or a personal flaw. I grew up hearing phrases like, "Stop being sensitive," or "You're just trying to get attention," whenever I dared express pain, stress, or even excitement. It was like my feelings were invisible, and over time, I learned to keep quiet. But sometimes, no matter how much you've been conditioned to swallow your pain, your body forces the truth out. The moment that kicked everything into motion happened on a Saturday afternoon. We were at my aunt's house for a family gathering. The living room was crowded, laughter bouncing off the walls, the smell of food heavy in the air. I remember feeling a tightness in my chest that started small, like someone had rested a heavy hand on me, and then it grew sharper, spreading up toward my shoulder. I must have grimaced, because my mom immediately noticed, but instead of concern, she rolled her eyes. "Nathan, stop being overdramatic," she said, her voice flat, dismissive. My cousin, sitting on the couch scrolling on her phone, didn't even look up before muttering, "He's always looking for attention. He probably just wants everyone to fuss over him." The words stung more than the pain at first. I tried to brush it off, but then the tightness deepened, and I clutched my chest without even realizing it. A part of me wanted to ask for help, but another part, trained by years of being belittled, told me to stay quiet so I wouldn't give them more ammunition. So I sat there, silent, sweating, listening to my family joke about meaningless things while I felt my own body betray me. It wasn't until my aunt's neighbor, who happened to stop by with a dish, noticed me pale and hunched that anyone took me seriously. She gasped and asked if I was okay, which forced everyone else to actually look at me. By then, I could barely get out a word, my breath shallow. My mom groaned like I was embarrassing her and said, "Fine, if you're going to make a scene, let's just get this over with. Someone drive him to urgent care so we can all get back before dessert." The way she said it, like my pain was an inconvenience, lit a spark of anger in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. At the hospital, the nurses immediately wheeled me in, their urgency a stark contrast to my family's apathy. My mom and cousin followed, looking irritated, whispering about how I always blew things out of proportion. I lay there on the bed, monitors hooked to me, the beeping loud in the sterile room, and I kept replaying their words in my head. When the doctor walked in with the scan results, though, everything changed. He looked at me, then at them, and his face went pale. His tone was serious, clipped. That's when the room went silent. The doctor's face stayed pale as he explained what the scan revealed. I don't remember the exact medical terms because my head was spinning, but the gist was clear. This wasn't just some passing discomfort or stress. There had been a real issue with my heart, something that required immediate attention and careful monitoring. He wasn't theatrical about it, just matter of fact, but the weight in his voice made it impossible to ignore. For a moment, I thought my family might finally understand. That maybe this would be the turning point where they'd see me not as overdramatic Nathan, but as someone genuinely struggling. But instead of softening, they doubled down. My mom crossed her arms and said to the doctor, "You're probably just overcautious. Every time Nathan sneezes, he thinks he's dying." The doctor frowned, trying to remain professional, and repeated more firmly that this was serious. My cousin chimed in with a muttered, "Figures. He always finds a way to make everything about him." She scrolled on her phone again, like the whole situation bored her. I wanted to defend myself, to shout that I hadn't asked for any of this, that I'd actually tried to keep it quiet until it became unbearable. But the years of conditioning held me back. My words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was sit there, listening, as they spoke about me like I wasn't even in the room. What made it worse was the way they compared me to my cousin, Claire, the golden child of the family. She had always been praised for her ambition, her achievements, her charm. In their eyes, She could do no wrong. As I sat in the hospital bed, chest aching and wires hooked to me, my mom leaned toward her and said, loud enough for me to hear, "See, Claire? This is why I'm so proud of you. You never let little things hold you back. You're strong, not like." Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Claire smirked, flipping her hair back, and replied, "Yeah, I just don't give in to weakness." The words landed like a punch. I wasn't weak. I knew that deep down. I had built my own life without their support, worked jobs they never cared to ask about, kept myself afloat. But in their narrative, weakness was my permanent label, and they wore it like a badge to lift themselves higher. When the nurse came in to set up further tests, my mom sighed loudly, checking her watch. "How long is this going to take? We've got family waiting back home." It's just so like him to ruin an entire day for everyone. I caught the nurse glance at her, then at me, her eyes full of pity. That pity cut even deeper because it highlighted what I had been denying. My own family didn't care whether I was okay. After the nurse left, my mom's tone shifted from irritation to guilt-tripping. She leaned closer and whispered, "Do you realize the stress you're putting on me? You've always been like this, taking all the attention, draining everyone. We're supposed to be celebrating, and here you are again." I clenched my fists under the blanket. The pain in my chest wasn't just physical anymore. It was layered with years of frustration and anger that I had swallowed down. I wanted to scream that I didn't choose this, that I didn't want their attention, that I just wanted a family who cared. But instead, I let the silence sit heavy between us. When my dad arrived later, he didn't ask how I was. He didn't even look at me first. He walked straight to Claire, hugged her, and said, "I'm glad you were here to help your mom handle this. You're always the responsible one." She smiled, basking in the praise, while I sat in the bed like furniture. Then he finally glanced at me and muttered, "Don't milk this too much, Nathan. Doctors love making things sound worse than they are." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about one incident. This was the story of my whole life condensed into a single hospital room, me fighting for breath, while they competed for who could dismiss me the most. The tension didn't ease after that. If anything, it grew heavier. Even as the medical team tried to help me, my family's disdain clung to me like a shadow, suffocating in its own way. And yet, as painful as it was, something inside me began to shift. A quiet ember of resolve started to burn. Their cruelty wasn't new, but the stakes were. This wasn't just about feelings anymore. It was about my health, my life, and I knew that if they could still treat me like this at my lowest point, then something had to change. That ember of resolve, though, hadn't turned into action yet. At that stage, I was still stuck in the room, tethered to wires, listening to the rising storm of dismissive comments, favoritism, and manipulation. And I knew, deep down, that the worst was still coming. The hospital kept me overnight for observation, and by the next morning, I was still hooked up to monitors, trying to keep calm while my chest throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The medical team checked on me regularly, treating me with a seriousness that my family refused to acknowledge. I thought maybe, just maybe, a full night to think about it would soften them. Maybe they'd come in with a little empathy. But if anything, the air felt heavier when my mom and cousin walked back into the room. My mom had that clipped, businesslike tone she used whenever she was about to make something all about herself. "Nathan, the doctors said it isn't immediately life-threatening, right? So that means you can handle a little responsibility while you're lying here. I don't want to hear any more dramatics." I blinked at her, confused. "What responsibility?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That's when she pulled out a folder of papers. Bills, insurance statements, and something I hadn't seen before, forms with my name on them. "I already told the nurse you'd be responsible for covering the extra costs," she said flatly. "You're an adult. You should be paying your own way. Claire doesn't need to be dragged into this." My cousin smirked, like she had won something. She added, "Yeah, Nathan, you've always leaned on everyone else. Maybe this will finally make you grow up." I felt my stomach drop. My mom had already told the hospital that I would take on the costs, without even asking me. It wasn't just about money, though I knew it wouldn't be cheap. It was the principle. At the exact moment when I should have been cared for, when they should have been stepping up as family, they had turned the situation into another opportunity to put me down and exploit me. I told her I hadn't agreed to anything, but she waved her hand dismissively. "It's already handled. Don't make a scene. Honestly, Nathan, You should be grateful Claire is even here helping me. You never do anything for this family. That was the breaking point. I had heard those words before in different forms my whole life, but hearing them while strapped to a hospital bed, while my chest still ached from the night before, made something inside me snap. The betrayal wasn't subtle anymore. It was written in ink, in the signatures they'd forged on my behalf. They hadn't just dismissed me this time. They had taken my vulnerability and twisted it into leverage. The betrayal didn't end there. Later that afternoon, while I dozed in and out, I overheard them in the hallway. My mom's voice was sharp but smug. This might be good for him. A reality check. He's always been weak, but if the bills pile up, maybe he'll finally toughen up. Claire laughed softly and said, or he'll just crawl back home and admit he can't handle it. Either way, we win. The words dug into me like shards of glass. I wasn't even sure which hurt more, the fact that they were so willing to sabotage me, or the fact that they did it with such casual cruelty, like it was a game. That was the moment I stopped hoping they'd change. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just keep swallowing the pain and waiting for validation that was never coming. I lay there, staring at the sterile ceiling, my chest heavy but my mind sharper than it had been in years. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was deliberate betrayal. And as I listened to their voices fading down the hall, I realized I had reached the emotional turning point. Something in me shifted. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, but it was there, a resolve that I wouldn't let this pass. That ember that had sparked before was now aflame, and though I didn't yet know how, I promised myself one thing. I would not let this betrayal go unanswered. The days that followed felt like a blur, but not the kind where time passes quickly. It was the kind where every second drags, heavy and suffocating, each one reminding me how utterly alone I really was. The hospital discharged me with a strict regimen, medication, follow-ups, and instructions to limit stress. Ironically, the moment I got back home, stress seemed to multiply tenfold. My mom barely spoke to me except to remind me about the bills she had dumped in my lap. The insurance form sat on the kitchen counter like a silent accusation. My cousin Claire paraded around, bragging about her new internship, while tossing little comments over her shoulder like, "Don't overdo it, Nathan. Wouldn't want you collapsing again." I retreated to my room most days, the walls closing in on me. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my heart would betray me again in my sleep. The ache in my chest was manageable with the medication, but the ache in my mind was something else entirely. I kept replaying the moment in the hospital when I overheard their words, that casual cruelty about winning. The more I thought about it, the more it hollowed me out. What cut deepest wasn't just their dismissal. It was the betrayal written in ink, the bills they forced onto me. I tried to call the hospital to dispute the charges, but they told me it was already processed. My mom's signature had been accepted as a guardian's note, even though I was an adult. She told us you couldn't make decisions clearly at the time, the billing rep said sympathetically. That nearly broke me. She had used my vulnerability as her excuse to tie me to debt. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand answers. But every time I tried to open my mouth at dinner, her cold stare silenced me. She'd say things like, "You should be grateful we were there at all. Do you know how embarrassing it was for us? Claire had to carry the family while you were lying in bed." It was a slow erosion, day by day. My friends stopped reaching out because I kept declining plans, too drained to pretend everything was fine. Work became harder, the stress made it impossible to focus, and I worried about losing my job. My health, both physical and mental, was spiraling. That was rock bottom, not just being dismissed, but realizing that the very people who should have been my support system were the ones pushing me down further. And yet, somewhere in that darkness, a seed of clarity began to grow. I started journaling late at night, scribbling down every slight, every betrayal, every cruel word. At first, it was just an outlet, but then the notes started to look like plans, ideas, small ways I could distance myself, regain control. I researched my rights, learned how forged medical documents could be challenged, and quietly reached out to an advocate I found through a local patient support group. I didn't tell my family. On the outside, I played the same role I always had, the quiet, weak one who let things roll off his back. But inside, something was shifting. I was still suffering, still dragging myself through each day with the weight of betrayal on my shoulders, but I wasn't just sitting in the darkness anymore. I was mapping the way out. The turning point hadn't arrived yet, but I could feel it looming. For now, though, I was at the bottom, broke, dismissed, aching in body and spirit. And that bottom gave me something I hadn't had before, nothing left to lose. The climb back up wasn't fast, and it wasn't glamorous. It was quiet, grueling, and at times, painfully lonely. But it was mine. I started with small victories. The first was finding a new doctor, someone outside the network my mom had shoved me into. This doctor listened. He treated me like a human being, not a nuisance. With his help, I got my medication stabilized, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like my body wasn't working against me. That stability gave me just enough strength to focus on the rest of my life. Work had been slipping through my fingers, but instead of letting it collapse, I doubled down. I pulled late nights when my chest allowed it, forced myself to push past the fog. Slowly, my performance improved. My boss noticed. Within 6 months, I had clawed my way not just back to baseline, but ahead. I was promoted to a position with more pay and more responsibility, a role that gave me the autonomy I had craved for years. That extra income became fuel. I didn't flaunt it at home. I kept it quiet. My mom and Claire still saw me as the weak one, the one barely holding it together. But while they whispered about me behind closed doors, I was opening new ones. I saved aggressively, researched investments, and built a financial cushion. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to feel safe from them, safe from being cornered again. Emotionally, I built myself back up too. Therapy became a lifeline. Every session peeled back layers of guilt and shame that my family had piled on me for years. My therapist's words echoed in my head. "You are not weak. You survived people who convinced you were." Those words became a mantra on the days I felt myself slipping. The more I stabilized, the clearer my thinking became. I revisited the notes I had scribbled during my lowest point, the ones that had started as venting but had grown into something more. Now, they weren't just pages of pain. They were a blueprint. I gathered every record from the hospital, every bill, every piece of correspondence. I saved screenshots of texts from my mom and Claire dismissing me, mocking me, belittling me. I didn't know yet how I'd use it all, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let their betrayal disappear into silence. Meanwhile, my relationship with them grew colder. At family dinners, I no longer tried to defend myself. I let them talk, let them sneer, let them write the same old story. They thought I was still the same Nathan, docile, dependent, desperate for their approval. In reality, I was becoming someone else entirely. Someone who didn't need them. Someone who was learning how to hold power in silence. Claire, the golden cousin, kept bragging about her career moves. She landed a job at a firm through family connections, and every conversation became about her bright future. My parents glowed with pride. I sat quietly, sipping water, hiding a small smile. Because while they praised her, they didn't realize I had been building something stronger, success earned, not handed. By the end of that year, I had my own apartment, far from their reach. A clean space, mine alone, without the constant hum of criticism. Moving out wasn't just about distance, it was about reclaiming my life. And as I shut the door behind me on that first night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. But the rise wasn't just about money or independence. It was about clarity. I finally understood that their treatment of me wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their need to control and belittle. And now that I was no longer under their roof, no longer bound by their forged signatures and manipulations, I had something they never expected me to have: freedom. And with freedom came power. Power they didn't even know I had yet. It was almost eerie how life has a way of circling back, setting the stage for things you could never have planned. By the time I was steady in my own apartment, thriving at work, and quietly saving every extra dollar, I thought my family might finally fade into the background. But fate, or irony, had other plans. The setup for what would eventually become my turning point started with something deceptively small: a phone call. My cousin Claire called me one evening, her voice dripping with the kind of forced sweetness I recognized instantly. She never called me unless she wanted something. "Nathan," she said, stretching my name like it was uncomfortable in her mouth. "I heard you've been doing well. Got a promotion, right?" I hesitated. Word had gotten around faster than I'd hoped. I muttered a simple, "Yeah," keeping my tone neutral. She chuckled lightly and added, "Good for you. You must finally feel like a grown-up." I wanted to hang up right there, but then she said something that made me pause. "Listen, I've been having some trouble at work. Nothing major, but, office politics can be brutal. And since you're in a similar field, maybe you could help me? You know, put in a good word with your contacts." That's when it clicked. We weren't in the same field, not really, but there was overlap. Enough overlap that her shiny new job relied on some of the very clients my company had begun working with. Clients I now had direct access to through my promotion. My position gave me a quiet but powerful role. I wasn't at the top, but I was close enough to influence who got contracts, who got glowing recommendations, and who found doors suddenly closed. I didn't say anything in that moment. I just told her I was busy and would see what I could do. But when I hung up, my mind was racing. For the first time, I had leverage. Real leverage. Over the next few weeks, I listened more carefully whenever family conversations turned to Claire. My mom bragged endlessly about her career, how she was climbing so fast, how she'd be a partner before 30. But then my dad let slip that Claire's firm had been struggling to land a few big clients. Clients that just so happened to be on my company's radar. I started to connect the dots. And as I quietly gathered information, an opportunity presented itself. I was invited to sit in on strategy meetings with executives, not to make decisions outright, but to provide data and insights. And in those rooms, I realized just how much influence I really had. My reports shaped the direction of deals. My words, even if indirect, carried weight. At the same time, I discovered something else, something personal. While organizing old papers for my own records, I stumbled across copies of the hospital bills. Buried in the paperwork was a detail I hadn't noticed before. My mom had used not just my name, but my social security number to process the charges. It wasn't just forging a signature, it was identity misuse. That revelation hit me like ice water. Suddenly, the pieces clicked together. I had financial stability, growing influence at work, and now, documented proof of what my family had done to me. Proof that could shatter their carefully maintained image if I chose to use it. The knowledge burned in my pocket like a secret weapon. I didn't wield it yet, but I kept it close, adding it to the growing file of evidence I'd been collecting. And while my family continued to treat me as the invisible weakling, they had no idea I was sitting on power that could tilt the scales completely. It wasn't time yet, but I could feel the storm building. For years, they had dismissed, belittled, and betrayed me. Now, without even realizing it, they had handed me the tools I needed to turn the narrative upside down. And I was patient. I let them talk, let them brag, let them underestimate me. Because the longer they believed I was harmless, the more devastating the fallout would be when the truth finally came crashing down. When the moment finally arrived, it wasn't dramatic at first. It was quiet, almost mundane, like flicking the first domino in a long line. But I had been waiting for it, setting it up piece by piece. It began at work. My company was in the middle of reviewing proposals for a massive contract, one that Claire's firm desperately wanted. I knew this because my mom wouldn't stop bragging about it during family dinners, repeating word for word the speeches Claire had given her about how this deal would seal her future. I kept my face neutral, sipping my drink while my mind turned. What they didn't know was that I was on the analysis team for that very project. My reports, while not the final say, shaped how the decision-makers viewed each proposal. When I reviewed Claire's firm's bid, it wasn't hard to see the weaknesses. They were flashy, but their numbers didn't add up. Normally, I might have let it slide with a neutral note. But this time, I was meticulous. I highlighted every inconsistency, every risk, every detail that could undermine their pitch. Not in a way that made me look biased, just clear, factual, undeniable. When the final meeting came, the executives leaned heavily on my analysis. Claire's firm was cut from consideration before the second round. The next week, I got a text from her. "Did you hear? We lost the bid. Everything was riding on that." "I don't get it. We had it in the bag." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back a short reply. "Tough break. Hope things get better." Calm, neutral, satisfying. But that was just the professional side. The deeper revenge came with the hospital paperwork. I had been quietly building a file of every document, every forged form, every dismissive text from my mom. With the help of a legal aid clinic, I drafted a formal complaint. Not against my family directly at first, but against the hospital for accepting a fraudulent signature and processing charges under my name without proper consent. The investigation that followed inevitably led back to the person who submitted the paperwork, my mom. I didn't tell her what was happening. I let the storm roll in on its own. The first hint she got was a letter in the mail, summoning her for a formal review. I'll never forget the look on her face at the dinner table when she read it. Her confident tone faltered for the first time in years. This must be a mistake, she muttered, her eyes darting nervously. Claire tried to brush it off, but even she couldn't hide the worry in her voice. Meanwhile, I had been quietly distancing myself, ensuring that none of their fallout touched me. My finances were separate, my apartment secure, my career steadily climbing. For once, I wasn't the vulnerable one scrambling to survive. I was the one pulling strings. The beauty of it all was that I never raised my voice, never had to confront them head-on. Every move I made was calm, precise, backed by evidence and truth. They had spent years painting me as weak, overdramatic, incapable. But in the end, it was their arrogance, their dismissal, their betrayal that set the trap. All I had to do was let them walk into it. And as I watched them begin to unravel, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also clarity. Revenge wasn't about screaming at them or demanding apologies. It was about balance, about finally tilting the scales back after years of being crushed under their weight. Of course, the fallout hadn't fully landed yet. The letters, the professional failures, the cracks in their confidence, those were just the beginning. The real collapse was still coming. The unraveling came slowly, then all at once. The hospital's internal review uncovered exactly what I knew it would. My mother had submitted forms with my personal information without consent, signing my name and using my social security number to push through charges I had never authorized. When the report was finalized, it was forwarded to both the insurance company and the state's patient protection board. What might have been brushed off as just a family misunderstanding suddenly had real legal weight. My mom tried to spin it as a mistake. She called me late one night, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. "Nathan, you have to fix this. Tell them you gave me permission. You know I was just trying to help." I let the silence hang for a moment before replying. "Help? You saddled me with thousands in debt when I was in a hospital bed. You didn't help me. You buried me." Then I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt for hanging up. I felt free. The fallout spread from there. My cousin Claire's career, which had been her pride and my family's endless bragging point, started to crack. After losing the big contract, word circulated about her firm's unstable performance. Clients began pulling out, whispers spreading about their reliability. It didn't take long for her golden child glow to dim. When she came home for a family dinner, her tone was bitter, her usual smugness gone. "This is your fault," she snapped at me in the kitchen when no one else was listening. "You could have helped. You chose not to." I looked her in the eye, calm and steady. "You're right. I chose not to. Because helping you meant stepping back into the role you and Mom wrote for me. Weak, disposable, invisible. I'm done playing that part." Her face flushed red, but she didn't say another word. Meanwhile, the financial investigation into my mom's misuse of my identity left her with heavy fines and a permanent note on her record. The woman who had spent years parading her responsibility and sacrifice to anyone who would listen now had to explain why she was being audited, why her reputation was suddenly tarnished. And the most satisfying part? I didn't have to lift a finger once the ball started rolling. The truth did all the work. My dad, who had always been quick to praise Claire and dismiss me, grew quieter as everything unraveled. For once, he didn't have a lecture or a jab. He just sat at the table, staring at his plate, realizing the golden pedestal he'd built under Claire and my mom was collapsing. As for me, I kept moving forward. My career continued to grow, my health stabilized, and for the first time in years, I felt light. The weight of constantly trying to prove myself to them was gone. I didn't need their approval. I never had. The final confrontation came at what was supposed to be another family gathering. My mom tried to reclaim control, to play hostess like nothing had changed. But when she reached across the table and said, "Nathan, don't you think you owe us some gratitude after everything?" something in me shifted once more. I set down my fork, looked her dead in the eye, and replied, "Gratitude? You nearly cost me my health, my finances, and my peace of mind. And when I needed you most, you mocked me. You don't get my gratitude." You don't even get my attention anymore." The table went silent. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. My dad stared at his hands, and my mom, always so smug, so sure of her control, looked stunned for the first time in her life. I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked out. Not in anger, not in haste. Just steady, calm, and free. That was the last time I sat at their table. And as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't just been about watching them suffer consequences. It had been about reclaiming myself, my life, and my voice. The final line that echoed in my head as I walked away was simple, but it carried the weight of everything I had endured. They dismissed me as weak for years. But in the end, their downfall came not from my weakness, only from their own cruelty.